No alpha would ever choose her. That's what Avon's neighbor said every time she walked past. Every single day for the last 7 years. And the worst part? Hester wasn't wrong. Avon had learned to keep her head down, her sleeves long, and her emotions carefully controlled. Because when she felt too much, the shadow spread. The dark, vine-like marks that crawled across her skin whenever her heart beat too fast. The curse she'd been born with. The reason her father had locked her away. Why her sister barely acknowledged her existence. Why every alpha who'd ever seen her true form had recoiled in disgust. She was 24 years old, unmated, and running out of time. In the wolf territories of Valdros, an unmated female past 25 could be claimed by any alpha who wanted her. Consent or not. It was an ancient law, barbaric and cruel, but it was the law nonetheless. Avon had 11 months left before she became property. So when the moving carriages arrived at the long-abandoned estate next to her small cottage, she didn't think much of it. New neighbors. Probably another merchant family or retired soldiers. Then he stepped out of the carriage. Theron, the Alpha King of Valdros himself. And when his pale gray eyes found hers across the overgrown fence line, something impossible happened. He smiled. Neither of them understood yet what that smile would cost them, or what it would save. The village of Ashwick had exactly 47 houses, 1 tavern, 1 healer, and precisely 0 tolerance for anything unusual. Avon had counted the houses during her walks. She'd memorized every cracked stone in the paths, every weathered fence post, and every face that turned away when she approached. When you spent most of your life being invisible, you learned to notice everything about the world that refused to see you. This morning, like every morning, she'd risen before dawn to tend her small garden. Vegetables mostly. Herbs that the healer sometimes purchased from her when no one was watching. It wasn't much of a living, but it was enough to keep her cottage standing and food in her belly. "There she goes," a voice carried across the morning mist. "The shadow-touched freak." Avon's hands stilled on the tomato vines. Hester stood at her own fence, arms crossed, lip curled. She was beautiful in the way wolves were supposed to be. Golden-haired, bright-eyed, with a mate and 3 pups and a place in the pack hierarchy. Everything Avon would never have. "You know," Hester continued, her voice pitched to Carrie, "my grandmother used to say that shadow-touched wolves should be drowned at birth. Would have saved everyone the trouble of looking at them." Avon's chest tightened. She felt the familiar prickle beneath her skin, the darkness wanting to spread, to crawl up her arms and across her face, to reveal exactly what she was. "Breathe," she told herself. "Don't react." But Hester wasn't finished. 11 months left, isn't it? The woman's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Though I suppose no alpha would want you anyway. Not after what happened to that merchant's boy. Eric, wasn't it? Burned alive in a fire that touched nothing else." Hester clicked her tongue. Strange, that. Very strange indeed. Avon's vision blurred. The old accusation, the old wound, ripped open fresh. "I didn't," she started. "Save it for the claiming alpha's shadow freak. Maybe one of them will believe you." Avon dropped her gardening shears and walked inside, closing the door quietly behind her. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't scream. She would simply breathe until the shadow retreated back beneath her skin. Eric. 7 years dead, and still his ghost followed her everywhere. She'd been 17 when her father had arranged the match. A merchant's son, handsome enough, willing to overlook her oddities in exchange for the status of marrying into the Alpha's family. For 3 months, she dared to hope for a normal life. Then one night, Eric had discovered her shadow marks. He'd recoiled in horror, called her a monster, threatened to expose her to the entire village. They'd argued. She'd been angry, angrier than she'd ever been. And by morning, Eric was dead, burned in his bed by a fire that left nothing else touched. No natural fire behaved that way, only shadow fire. Everyone assumed Avon had killed him. Her father had certainly encouraged that belief, but Avon didn't remember doing it. She'd been angry, yes, furious. But murder? She couldn't be certain either way. Her magic had always been wild, unpredictable. Perhaps she had done it without realizing. That uncertainty haunted her more than any accusation ever could. 11 months, she whispered to the empty cottage. It was a death sentence, just slower than most. The commotion started around midday. At first, Avon ignored it. Sounds from the main road were common enough, merchants passing through, travelers heading north. But then she heard something that made her pause. Hoofbeats. Dozens of them. And beneath them, the rumble of heavy carriages. She moved to her window and pulled the curtain back just slightly. The Blackwood estate. Abandoned for nearly 15 years since the old lord had died without heirs, sat on the hill directly beside her property. It was the largest house in Ashwick, though house was a generous term. It was practically a fortress, all dark stone and iron gates and windows that seemed to watch the village below with silent judgment. And right now, those iron gates were opening. Carriages streamed through, followed by riders in black and silver livery. Guards, Avon realized. Royal guards. Royal. She recognized the emblem on their chests, the wolf and crown of the Valdros throne. Why would royal guards be here? She thought. Then she saw him. He rode at the center of the procession, mounted on a black stallion that seemed too large to be real. He wasn't wearing a crown, but he didn't need one. Everything about him screamed authority. The breadth of his shoulders, the set of his jaw, the way the other riders kept their distance as if too close would burn them. Theron, the Alpha King. Avon had never seen him in person. Few commoners had. He ruled from the capital, 300 miles south, and rarely left the palace. Rumors about him were plentiful, though. They said he was cold, calculating, that he'd never taken a mate despite being well past 30, that something was wrong with him, something the court whispered about but never said aloud. Why would he be here? She thought again. In Ashwick, of all places? As if hearing her thoughts, the king's head turned. His gaze swept across the village below, passing over the tavern, the healer's hut, the rows of ordinary houses. Then it stopped. On her cottage. On her. Avon's breath caught. Even from this distance, she could feel the weight of his attention like a physical force. His eyes were pale, true silver gray, almost metallic, and they seemed to look straight through her window, straight through her curtain, and straight through her. Then something happened that made no sense at all. He smiled. Not a smirk. Not the cold, calculating expression she'd expected from a king. A genuine smile, small and almost surprised, as if he'd found something he hadn't expected to find. Avon stumbled back from the window, her blood rushing loud in her ears. The darkness stirred beneath her skin. By evening, the entire village was buzzing. The Alpha King had taken up residence in Blackwood Estate. The Alpha King was living in Ashwick. The Alpha King was her neighbor. Avon stayed inside, curtains drawn, trying to make sense of it. Kings didn't move to tiny villages on the northern border. Kings didn't smile at shadow-touched outcasts through cottage windows. None of this made any sense. A knock at her door made her jump. She approached cautiously, one hand pressed against her chest where the shadow always started when she was afraid. "Who's there?" "Delivery from Blackwood Estate, miss." She opened the door to find a young servant in royal livery, holding a basket covered with cloth. He looked nervous. "The king sends his compliments," the boy said, thrusting the basket toward her, "and requests the honor of your company for dinner tomorrow evening." Avon stared at him. "I'm sorry. What?" "Dinner," the boy repeated. "Tomorrow. Blackwood Estate, sunset." Before she could respond, he turned and practically ran back up the hill. Avon looked down at the basket. Inside, she found bread still warm from the oven, fresh fruit, a wheel of cheese that probably cost more than her cottage, and a small note written in elegant script. I look forward to meeting my neighbor properly. T. Her hands were shaking. This had to be a mistake. A cruel joke. Some elaborate trap she didn't understand. Because why would the Alpha King of Valdros want to have dinner with her? Unless he already knew what she was. And that thought was more terrifying than anything Hester had ever said. Avon didn't sleep that night. She sat in her small kitchen, staring at the basket of expensive food, turning the note over and over in her hands until the edges grew soft. The handwriting was elegant, confident, the kind of script that came from years of tutors and royal education. I look forward to meeting my neighbor properly. Why? She whispered to the empty room. Why would you want to meet me? By dawn, she'd convinced herself not to go. It was clearly a trap. The king had somehow learned about her condition, and this was some kind of test or punishment. Perhaps the court had decided that shadow-touched wolves needed to be registered, catalogued, contained. Or perhaps he simply wanted to see the freak up close before deciding what to do with her. But as the day wore on, another thought crept in. What if she didn't go, and he came to her instead? A king's invitation wasn't really an invitation, it was a command wrapped in courtesy. Refusing could be seen as an insult, and insulting the Alpha King carried consequences far worse than dinner. Besides, part of her, the part she tried very hard to ignore, was curious. That smile, that impossible smile, she kept returning to it. By late afternoon, Avon had made her decision. She would go. She would keep her sleeves long, her emotions controlled, and her secrets hidden. She would be boring and forgettable, and he would lose interest. And that would be the end of it. Simple. She chose her best dress. A dark green wool that covered her arms completely and didn't show stains. She braided her hair, plain brown and unremarkable, into a simple rope down her back. She looked exactly like what she was, a poor village girl with nothing to offer. Perfect, she thought. The walk to Blackwood Estate took less than 10 minutes, but each step felt like a mile. The iron gate stood open and a servant met her at the entrance with a bow that felt far too formal. Miss Avon, the king is expecting you. She followed him through corridors that seemed endless, past paintings and tapestries, and armor stands that probably cost more than everything she'd ever owned combined. The estate had been transformed. What she remembered as dusty and abandoned was now polished and gleaming, filled with warmth and light. Finally, the servant stopped before a heavy wooden door. "The king is inside," he said. "You may enter." Avon's hand trembled as she pushed the door open. The room was a study, smaller than she'd expected, lined with books and warmed by a fire burning low in the hearth. And standing by the window, backlit by the last rays of sunset, was the Alpha King himself. He was taller than she'd realized, broader. His hair was dark as ink, falling just past his jaw in waves that looked perpetually windswept. And when he turned to face her, those storm-gray eyes caught the firelight like molten metal. "You came," he said. His voice was deep, quiet. Nothing like the booming authority she'd imagined from a king. Avon dropped into a curtsy, adrenaline surging through her veins. "Your Majesty, I wasn't sure I had a choice." "You always have a choice." He moved away from the window, and she noticed something strange. He moved carefully, deliberately, like a man holding something back. "Please, sit." She sat in the chair he indicated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He took the seat across from her, close enough that she could smell him now, pine and smoke, and something wild beneath, something that made her wolf stir restlessly despite her fear. "You're afraid of me," he observed. "I'm afraid of why I'm here," Avon admitted before she could stop herself. His head tilted slightly. "And why do you think you're here?" "I don't know." She forced herself to meet his gaze. Kings don't move to border villages. Kings don't invite nobody peasants to dinner. Something is happening, and I don't understand it. And when I don't understand things, I assume the worst. For a long moment he simply looked at her. Then warmth touched his expression. That same look from the window. Small and almost surprised. Honest, he said softly. That's rare. I have no reason to lie to you, Your Majesty. No, I suppose you don't. He leaned back in his chair and some of the intensity left his expression. Very well. I'll be honest with you in return. I'm here because I had to leave the capital. The reasons are complicated. Political mostly, but also personal. This estate belonged to a distant cousin, and when he died, it passed to the crown. It seemed as good a place as any to disappear for a while. Disappear? Avon frowned. You're the king. How can you disappear? A shadow crossed his face. Something that looked almost like pain. Sometimes even kings need to run away, he said quietly. Avon had no response to that. It was the last thing she'd expected. Vulnerability from the most powerful man in Valdros. As for why I invited you specifically, he continued, his tone lighter now. Call it curiosity. I saw you yesterday, watching from your window. You looked at me differently than everyone else. Differently how? Like you weren't sure whether to be terrified or fascinated. His lips curved slightly. Most people are just terrified. The fascination is refreshing. Avon felt heat rise to her cheeks. I wasn't fascinated, I was confused. Even better. Dinner arrived then, carried in by silent servants who laid out more food than Avon had seen in months. Roasted meat, fresh vegetables, bread that steamed when torn. She tried not to stare. She tried not to eat like a starving animal. She mostly failed. If the king noticed, he said nothing. He ate sparingly, watching her with that metallic gaze that seemed to see too much. Your neighbor, he said eventually. Hester. She says unpleasant things about you. Avon's fork froze halfway to her mouth. You heard that? I have excellent hearing. His expression darkened. Is that common? The way she speaks to you? It's not uncommon. Why? And there it was. The question she'd been dreading. Avon set down her fork. Her appetite had vanished. Your Majesty, there are things about me that make people uncomfortable. I can't explain them. I can only tell you that whatever you've been told about me, whatever rumors you've heard, I'm not dangerous. I've never hurt anyone. She expected suspicion, questions, demands to know what she was hiding. Instead, the king said something that made no sense at all. I know. Avon blinked. What? I said I know. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze intent. I know you're not dangerous, Avon. I've known since the moment I saw you. How could you possibly know that? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I know what dangerous looks like, he said. I see it every time I look in the mirror. The fire crackled. The shadows danced. And Avon realized with a chill that ran down her spine that the Alpha King was hiding something too. Something far worse than shadow marks. 3 days passed. 3 days of royal servants delivering food to Avon's cottage every morning despite her protests. 3 days of the village buzzing with rumors. Why is the king interested in her? What does she have that we don't? It must be some kind of trick. 3 days of Avon trying not to think about storm-gray eyes and impossible words. I know what dangerous looks like. I see it every time I look in the mirror. What did that mean? What was the king hiding? On the 4th morning, another knock came at her door. This time, it wasn't a servant with a basket. It was the king himself. Avon's breath caught. She was still in her nightgown, her hair loose and tangled, and her feet bare. She hadn't even washed her face yet. Your Majesty, she gasped, clutching the door frame. I'm not dressed for... I apologize for the early hour, Theron said. He was dressed simply. Black shirt, riding boots, no crown or jewels. He looked almost ordinary. Almost. I've been thinking about our conversation, and there's something I need to discuss with you. May I come in? Every instinct screamed at her to say no. The king? In her cottage? It would destroy what little reputation she had left. The village would talk for years. But the look in his eyes made her step aside. He ducked through the doorway. He had to. He was so tall. And paused to survey the small space. If he was disgusted by her humble surroundings, he didn't show it. He simply looked around with quiet interest, taking in the dried herbs hanging from the rafters, the worn but clean furniture, the single window that let in the morning light. You live alone, he observed. Yes. No family? Avon hesitated. I have a father and a sister. They live in the village proper. But you don't live with them. No. He turned to face her, and something in his expression softened. I'm sorry, I'm asking too many questions. It's a habit. Wanting to understand things. People. Situations. Is that why you're here? Avon asked carefully. To understand me? Partially. He moved to her kitchen table and pulled out a chair. May I? She nodded. He sat, and somehow the gesture made him seem less intimidating. A king, sitting at her rough wooden table waiting for her to join him. Avon sat across from him, acutely aware of her bare feet and messy hair, and the fact that she probably looked like something a wolf had dragged in. I have a proposal, Theron said. Her chest tightened. Proposal? Not that kind. A hint of amusement crossed his face. At least, not yet. I'm aware that you're in a difficult situation. 24 years old, unmated, with the claiming law looming over your head. 11 months, if I'm not mistaken. Avon's blood ran cold. How do you know about that? I'm the king. It's my law. Or rather, my ancestors' law. I know exactly who it affects and when. His expression darkened. It's a barbaric practice. I've been trying to abolish it for years, but the old alphas on my council resist any change to tradition. So I'm just a political problem to you, Avon said flatly. No. His voice sharpened. You're a person trapped by a system that should never have existed. And I'm in a position to help you. She stared at him. Help me how? Theron leaned forward, his pale eyes intense. Marry me. The word hung in the air between them. Avon forgot how to breathe. Before you panic, he continued quickly, hear me out. This would be a marriage of convenience, a contract. You would become my wife in name, which would exempt you from the claiming law permanently. You would have protection, resources, freedom. In exchange? Her voice came out strangled. In exchange, I need someone by my side. Not for love. I can't offer that. Not for politics. You'd never have to appear at court if you didn't want to. But for presence. Having a wife would silence certain rumors, stop certain pressures, give me breathing room to deal with my own situation. What situation? His jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, very quietly, I'm not well, Avon. There's something wrong with me. Something that's been wrong for years. Being around people makes it worse. Being around you. He paused, as if surprised by his own words. Being around you doesn't. I don't understand. Neither do I. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. All I know is that when I saw you from my carriage, when I stood near you at dinner, I felt more settled than I have in months, maybe years. I don't know why. I don't know what it means. But I'm desperate enough to pursue it. Avon's mind was reeling. The king was proposing marriage. The king was admitting to some kind of illness. The king was saying that she, shadow-touched, cursed, unwanted her, somehow helped him. This is insane. she whispered. Yes, he agreed. I should say no. Probably. I don't even know you. No, you don't. His gaze never wavered. But I think you know what it's like to be trapped, to be seen as something broken, to have everyone assume the worst about you before you even open your mouth. He paused. I think perhaps you know exactly what I am, even if you don't have words for it yet. Emotion swelled in her chest, because he was right. She did know. She'd known from that first dinner. That sense of something leashed behind his eyes, something wild and dangerous that he was fighting every moment to control. If I agree, she said slowly, what would I have to do? Live at the estate. Attend occasional functions with me when required. Allow the world to believe we are married in truth. His voice dropped. I would never touch you without your consent, never force you into anything. You would have your own chambers, your own life, and your own freedom. And what do you get? Your presence. He offered a sad smile. That's all I need. Just someone nearby who doesn't make the darkness worse. Avon should have said no. Everything logical, everything careful, everything safe said to refuse this impossible offer from a king she didn't understand. But then she thought about Hester's sneering face, her father's cold silence, the 11 months ticking down like a death sentence, the alphas who would come to claim her like property, who would see her shadow marks and recoil, or, worse, not care what she was, as long as she served their purposes. And here was the king offering her a way out. Yes, she heard herself say, I'll do it. Theron's shoulders sagged with visible relief. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. She met his gaze. There are things about me you don't know. Things that might change your mind. I doubt it. You haven't seen what I really am? His expression transformed. Curiosity, maybe, or understanding. Then we're even, he said quietly. Because you haven't seen what I really am either. Before Avon could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Shouting. The crash of a door being thrown open. She'd forgotten. They were at her cottage, and voices were approaching fast. She knew that voice. Her father. The cottage door burst inward, and there he stood. Corvin, alpha of the Ashwick pack, and her father in blood, if nothing else. His eyes held something cold. Not just anger, but something deeper. Something that had always unsettled her without her understanding why. Behind him stood her sister Tanith, beautiful and frigid, her expression twisted with shock. What is the meaning of this? Corvin roared. His gaze landed on the king, and his face went white. Your Majesty, forgive me, I didn't realize. Didn't realize what? Theron rose slowly to his feet, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. That I was visiting my future wife? Dead silence. Tanith's hand flew to her mouth. Corvin's face shifted from white to red. Future. Wife? Your Majesty, there must be some mistake. This girl is... She's what? Theron's voice was soft, deadly. Choose your next words very carefully, Alpha Corvin. Corvin's mouth worked, but no sound came out. He was trapped, and he knew it. To reveal Avon's secret would be to admit he'd hidden a shadow-touched daughter all these years. To say nothing would be to accept that the king had chosen his discarded child over his favored one. Avon watched her father struggle and felt nothing. I was going to inform you, she said quietly, after the arrangements were finalized. Corvin's eyes snapped to her, filled with fury he didn't dare express. This is... sudden. Life often is, Theron replied. He moved to stand beside Aven, close enough that she could feel the strange coolness radiating from his skin. I trust you'll offer your blessing, as is customary. It wasn't a question. Of course, Your Majesty. The words seemed to cause Corvin physical pain. My blessing, freely given. Excellent. Theron's expression turned cold, sharp, a king's look. I look forward to becoming family. Corvin and Tanith retreated, stumbling over themselves to bow and scrape and escape. The door closed behind them, and the silence that followed was deafening. That, Avon said weakly, was my father. I gathered. He hates me. I gathered that too. She turned to look at him. Really look at him. This strange, impossible man who had just announced their engagement to save her from humiliation. Why did you do that? You could have let me explain, let me handle it. You've been handling things alone for long enough, Theron said simply. That stops now. Avon's eyes burned. She turned away before he could see. I should warn you, she managed. My father will try to stop this. He'll tell people about me, about what I am. The rumors will spread. Let them. You don't even know what the rumors will say. I don't care. Theron moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. Whatever you're hiding, Avon, whatever makes you think you're monstrous, I promise you, it won't change anything. You can't know that. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with something she couldn't name. When you're ready to show me, he said, I'll show you mine. Then you'll understand why your secrets don't scare me. He left without another word, and Avon stood alone in her cottage, shaking, terrified, and, for the first time in years, just slightly, impossibly, dangerously hopeful. That evening, Tanith returned alone. She appeared at Avon's door just as the sun was setting, her beautiful face twisted with barely controlled rage. You think you've won? Tanith hissed. You think marrying the king will erase what you are? I don't think anything, Avon said tiredly. I'm just trying to survive. Survive? Tanith laughed bitterly. You should have been drowned at birth, like father's mother was drowned. Like grandfather ordered when he discovered what she truly was. Avon went cold. What are you talking about? Oh, you don't know? Tanith's smile was cruel. Father's mother was shadow-touched. A witch, they called her. When grandfather discovered her true nature, he had her executed in secret, drowned in the river, and buried in an unmarked grave. Father spent his whole life terrified the curse would resurface in his children. She stepped closer. And then it did. In you. That's not. Bad blood runs in our family. Sister. Father's blood. His mother's blood. That's why he keeps you hidden. That's why he can barely stand to look at you. You're a reminder of everything our family has tried to bury. Avon's mind was spinning. Her grandmother? Shadow-touched? Why are you telling me this? She whispered. Because you need to understand what happens when people like you are discovered. Tanith's voice dropped. When the king finds out what you truly are, and he will find out, he won't just leave you. He'll destroy you, just like grandfather destroyed grandmother. Just like father would have destroyed you if he'd had the courage. He could have, couldn't he? Avon said slowly, a new suspicion forming. Father could have turned me over to the authorities years ago. Why didn't he? Something flickered in Tanith's expression. Fear. That's not your concern, she said quickly. Isn't it? But Tanith was already retreating, her composure cracking. Mark my words, sister, this marriage will be your undoing. She vanished into the gathering dark, and Avon stood in her doorway, more questions churning in her mind than before. Her grandmother, the drowning. Her father's inexplicable decision to hide her rather than expose her. What wasn't Tanith telling her? That night, a note arrived with her evening delivery. The wedding will take place in 3 days. I've handled the arrangements. All you need to do is arrive. Sleep well, Avon. Things are about to change. T. She read it 3 times. 3 days. In 3 days, she would marry the Alpha King. And he still had no idea what she really was. When he finds out, a voice whispered in her head. Her father's voice. Hester's voice. Everyone's voice. He'll destroy you. But another voice, smaller and quieter, dared to wonder. What if he doesn't? The morning of the wedding arrived with gray skies and a cold wind that rattled Avon's cottage windows. She stood before her small mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. The royal seamstresses had arrived yesterday with a gown, deep emerald silk that hugged her body before flowing to the floor in waves. Long sleeves, as she'd requested. High neckline, every inch of potentially marked skin covered. When she'd made the requests, she'd expected resistance. Questions. Instead, the head seamstress had simply nodded and said, "The king anticipated as much. He instructed us to follow your preferences exactly." He anticipated it. Avon didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified that he was already learning to read her. A knock at the door made her jump. "Miss Avon?" A servant's voice. "The carriage has arrived." She took one last look at herself. This stranger in silk, this woman about to marry a king, and walked out to meet her future. The ceremony would take place in the Great Hall of Blackwood Estate. Not a cathedral, not the capital, not any of the grand venues typically used for royal weddings. Theron had insisted on keeping it small, private, just the required witnesses and a priest. Less spectacle, less scrutiny, he'd explained in his last note. This is about protection, not performance. But as the carriage wound up the hill toward the estate, Avon saw that small was relative. The gates were flanked by royal guards in full ceremonial armor. Banners bearing the wolf and crown sigil snapped in the wind, and lining the path to the entrance despite the gray weather stood what seemed like half the village. They'd come to watch. Of course they had. Avon kept her eyes forward as she stepped out of the carriage. She heard the whispers immediately. "Look at her, acting like she belongs. Shadow-touched freak thinks she can be queen. The king must be mad, or cursed, or both." She walked through them like walking through fire, her chin high and her hands steady despite the darkness stirring beneath her skin. The great hall was warmer than outside, lit by hundreds of candles that cast dancing light across the stone walls. At the far end stood the priest, ancient and stern-faced. And beside him, waiting at the altar, was Theron. He wore black, as he always did. But today it was formal. A fitted coat with silver embroidery, dark trousers, polished boots. His hair had been pulled back from his face, revealing the sharp angles of his jaw and cheekbones. He looked every inch the king. And when his eyes found hers across the hall, his expression transformed into something that looked almost like wonder. Avon walked toward him on unsteady legs. There was no music, no procession, and no father to give her away. Just her footsteps echoing in the candlelit silence, and his pale gaze drawing her forward like a rope. When she reached the altar, Theron extended his hand. She took it. His skin was cool. Not cold, but cooler than any wolf should be. She'd noticed it before, filed it away with all the other strange things about him. Now, standing here, about to bind herself to this man, it felt like a warning she should have heeded. "You came," he said quietly, for her ears only. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I thought you might come to your senses." A hint of warmth touched his voice. "I'm glad you didn't." The priest cleared his throat. "We are gathered here," he began, his voice echoing through the hall, "to witness the binding of Alpha King Theron of Valdros to Avon of Ashwick, in accordance with the ancient laws of our kind." The ceremony was simpler than Avon had expected. Vows of loyalty, of protection, of partnership. Nothing about love, nothing about forever. Just two people agreeing to stand together against whatever came. When it was time for the marking, the traditional bite that would seal the bond, Theron leaned close to her ear. "We don't have to do this publicly," he murmured. "A verbal claim will satisfy the law. The physical marking can wait until you're ready, if you're ever ready." Words caught in her throat. He was giving her a choice. Again. "A verbal claim," she whispered back. "Please." He nodded once, then turned to face the small gathering of witnesses. I claim this woman as mine, he announced, his voice carrying through the hall. My wife, my queen, my partner. Let no wolf challenge this bond. I claim this man as mine, Avon echoed, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. My husband, my king, my partner. Let no wolf challenge this bond. The priest raised his hands. By the power of the old laws and the witness of those gathered, I pronounce this union sealed. What has been bound, let no one break. It was done. She was married to the Alpha King. The small reception afterward was a blur of faces and congratulations that felt hollow. Avon stood beside Theron, accepting well wishes from nobles she didn't know, feeling like an imposter in her own life. Then a familiar figure pushed through the crowd. Tanith. Her sister was dressed in pale blue, beautiful as always, her expression sharp as a blade. She curtsied before Theron with exaggerated grace. Your Majesty, she purred. Congratulations on your unexpected choice. Thank you, Theron said coolly. Tanith turned to Avon and her smile widened. Sister. How fortunate for you. Though I do wonder how long this arrangement will last once the king sees what you truly are. Tanith, Avon started. Does he know about the marks? Tanith's voice was soft, meant only for them. Does he know what happens when you feel too much? Does he know you burned Eric alive when he rejected you? That's not enough. Theron's voice cut through like ice. Tanith's smile faltered. Whatever you think you know about my wife, the king continued, his tone pleasant but his eyes deadly. I suggest you keep it to yourself, unless you'd like to discover exactly how I deal with those who threaten what's mine. For a moment, Tanith looked genuinely afraid. Then she recovered, dropping another curtsy before retreating into the crowd. Avon was shaking. She's going to tell everyone, she whispered. She's going to make sure the whole kingdom knows. Let her. Theron's hand found the small of her back, steadying her. Whatever she says, it changes nothing. You don't understand. The things she could tell them. About Eric. About my marks. Avon. He turned her gently to face him. I meant what I said. Whatever you're hiding, it won't change this. It won't change my decision. She wanted to believe him. Gods, she wanted to believe him so badly. But she'd learned long ago that words were easy. It was actions that revealed the truth. I hope you're right, she said quietly. His gaze held hers for a long moment. So do I, he admitted. And somehow, that honesty was more comforting than any promise could have been. The suite they'd prepared for her was larger than her entire cottage. Avon stood in the center of it, trying to comprehend the space. A canopied bed that could fit 6 people, wardrobes carved from dark wood, a bathing chamber with an actual copper tub, windows that overlooked the moonlit gardens below. This is mine? She'd asked the servant who'd escorted her. These are the Queen's chambers, Your Majesty. Your Majesty. She was Your Majesty now. The servant had left her alone to prepare for bed, to prepare for her husband. Avon sat on the edge of the mattress, her hands clasped in her lap, her chest tight with anxiety. She'd changed into a nightgown, modest, long-sleeved, provided by the seamstresses along with her wedding dress. She looked like a virgin sacrifice waiting for the dragon, which, she supposed, wasn't entirely inaccurate. The knock, when it came, was soft. Come in, she managed. Theron entered quietly, closing the door behind him. He'd changed too. Simple black trousers and a loose white shirt, unlaced at the throat. His hair was down again, falling around his face in dark waves. He looked less like a king and more like a man. A very large, very intimidating man who was now her husband. You're terrified, he observed. Is it that obvious? You're sent. He moved closer, but slowly, giving her time to adjust. Fear and anxiety, mostly. But underneath... He paused, something flickering in his expression. Something else. Avon's cheeks heated. She looked away. Theron stopped several feet from the bed. I'm not here to claim my marital rights, Avon. I meant what I said. Nothing happens without your consent. I only came to... He trailed off, looking almost uncertain. To what? She prompted. To see if you wanted company. He laughed quietly, the sound self-deprecating. That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? The king, asking to keep his new bride company like their childhood friends. It doesn't sound ridiculous. Avon studied him, this strange, complicated man. It sounds lonely. Pain flickered across his face. Or perhaps recognition. I am lonely, he admitted quietly. I've been lonely for a very long time. Being around people usually makes it worse. The noise in my head gets louder. The darkness gets stronger. But you... He shook his head. You're quiet. Being near you is... peaceful. I've never been called peaceful before. Then everyone else is a fool. She had no response to that, so she said the only thing she could think of. Stay. Theron went still. What? Stay, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Not for... I don't mean... Just stay. Keep me company. I don't want to be alone either. For a long moment he simply looked at her. Then, slowly, he moved to the other side of the bed and sat down, his back against the headboard, his long legs stretched before him. They sat in silence for a while. The candles flickered. The wind whispered against the windows. Can I ask you something? Avon finally said. Anything. The cold. Your skin. Your presence. It's always cool. Wolves run hot, especially alphas. But you... She glanced at him. Is it part of what's wrong with you? The thing you mentioned? Theron was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Yes, he finally said. It's a symptom. The cold, the darkness, and the way my mind sometimes feels like it's full of shadows that want to swallow me whole. His voice was distant, clinical, like he was describing someone else. It started when I was young. It's gotten worse as I've aged. The healers can't explain it. The priests say I'm cursed. My council thinks I'm going mad. Are you? Going mad? He turned his head to look at her. Some days, I'm not sure. I know what that's like, Avon said quietly, wondering if you're the monster everyone says you are. You're not a monster. Neither are you. His laugh was hollow. You don't know that. Then show me. The words were out before she could stop them. You said when I was ready to show you my truth, you'd show me yours. So show me. Theron stared at her. You don't want to see it. Let me decide that. Another long pause. Then, slowly, he extended his hand, palm up. Watch, he said. Avon watched. At first, nothing happened. Then, gradually, she saw it. Darkness gathering in his palm, coiling like smoke, like liquid shadow. It spread up his fingers, across his wrist, swirling in patterns that seemed almost alive. The temperature in the room dropped sharply. It wants out, Theron said, his voice strained. Always wants out. I have to fight every moment to keep it contained. When I'm around people, around chaos, around strong emotions, it pushes harder. It feeds on distress. The shadows writhed in his hand. Avon should have been afraid. This was what the stories whispered about. The cursed king, the darkness touched, and the monster on the throne. But all she felt was recognition. May I? She asked, reaching toward his hand. Avon, don't. But she'd already touched him. Her fingers brushed against the shadows, and something extraordinary happened. They receded. The darkness shrank back like a wounded animal, retreating into his skin until his palm was just a palm again, cool, pale, but normal. Theron stared at their joined hands, his expression stunned. How did you do that? He breathed. I don't know. Avon felt breathless. I just touched you. It's never done that before. It's never retreated for anyone. They looked at each other in the candlelight, both of them shaken, both of them wondering what this meant. Maybe, Avon said slowly. We're more alike than we knew. Theron turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. His grip was gentle, almost reverent. Maybe we are, he agreed. They sat like that for a long time, holding hands in the darkness, two broken people who somehow made each other whole. Eventually, Avon's eyes grew heavy. She felt herself leaning toward him, exhaustion finally claiming her. Sleep, Theron murmured. I'll stay. You don't have to. I want to. So she slept, curled against his cool presence, her hand still in his. And for the first time in years, the darkness beneath her skin stayed perfectly, peacefully still. Weeks passed. Avon had expected the arrangement to feel awkward, artificial. Two strangers playing house while they navigated their respective secrets. Instead, it felt like breathing. Theron came to her chambers every evening. Sometimes they talked for hours, about books, about politics, about the small details of their lives that no one had ever cared to ask about before. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, reading by the fire, existing in each other's space without the need for words. And every night, without fail, he held her hand. It had become a ritual. The moment he arrived, he would extend his hand, and she would take it, and his shadows would quiet. He'd tried to explain it once, how her touch created a silence in his mind that nothing else could match. How he'd spent decades drowning in darkness, and she was the first shore he'd ever found. You're my anchor, he'd said one night, his voice rough with something she didn't dare name. Without you, I'd drift away entirely. Avon had never been anyone's anchor before. She'd only ever been a burden, an embarrassment, a mistake. The idea that she could be essential to someone, especially someone like him, made her chest ache in ways she didn't understand. But it wasn't just the evenings that changed. Theron began finding excuses to see her during the day as well. He'd invite her to walk in the gardens, to join him in his study while he worked, to take meals together instead of separately. People will talk, Avon warned him one afternoon, as they sat together in the library. A king spending so much time with his wife isn't normal. They'll think you're… What? Happy? His lips curved. Let them think whatever they want. I'm serious, Theron. He looked up from his book, and his gaze softened in a way that made her breath catch. So am I, he said quietly. I've spent my entire life performing coldness, distance, control, pretending I didn't want the things I wanted, denying myself anything that might make the darkness worse. He set the book aside. Being with you doesn't make it worse. It makes it better. Why would I deny myself that? Avon had no answer. That night, she lay awake in her chambers, Theron's quiet breathing beside her. He'd started staying through the night 2 weeks ago, after she'd admitted that the nightmares were easier when he was there. What nightmares? He'd asked. The ones where the shadow takes over, she confessed. Where I lose control and hurt someone. Where I become the monster everyone says I am. He'd pulled her closer then, his arms wrapping around her, his cool presence soothing the perpetual heat beneath her skin. I have nightmares too, he'd murmured, about the darkness swallowing me whole, about losing myself to it and never coming back, about hurting the only person who's ever made me feel human. Me? You. Now, lying in the dark, listening to him breathe, Avon finally admitted the truth to herself. She was falling in love with him, not with the king, not with the power or the protection or the titles, with him, the man who brought her books because he'd noticed what she liked to read, who asked about her garden every morning because he knew it mattered to her, who held her hand like she was precious, like she was worth holding. The man who looked at her like she was the only light in his darkness. I'm falling in love with my husband, she thought, and the realization was terrifying. Because he'd been clear from the beginning. This was an arrangement, a contract. He couldn't offer love. Those were his exact words. And even if he could, Even if by some miracle he felt the same, he still didn't know what she really was. The thought sent ice through her veins. She'd managed to hide it so far. The long sleeves, the controlled emotions, the careful distance from anything that might trigger the shadow. But how long could she keep it up? How long before he saw the marks creeping across her skin? Before he witnessed what happened when she truly lost control? He'd shown her his darkness. He'd trusted her with his most terrible secret, and she was still hiding hers. Coward, she thought bitterly. Beside her, Theron stirred. "You're awake," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't wake me. I felt you worrying." His hand found hers in the darkness. "What's wrong?" "Everything. Nothing. The fact that I'm in love with you and terrified of what happens when you learn the truth." "Just thinking," she said instead. "About the future." Theron was quiet for a moment. Then he shifted, pulling her closer, her back against his chest, his arm draped over her waist. "I think about it too," he admitted. "About what happens next. About whether I can keep the darkness contained forever. About whether—" He paused. "About whether you'll stay when you realize exactly how broken I am." Her chest constricted. "I already know you're broken. You know the surface, the part I've let you see. Then show me the rest." "I will." His lips brushed against her hair. "When I can. When I trust that it won't send you running." "I won't run." "You say that now." "I mean it." She felt him smile against her hair. "Then we're both fools, aren't we? Both hiding our worst selves from the only person who might actually understand." Avon closed her eyes, guilt churning in her stomach. "Tell him," a voice whispered. "Tell him now." But fear kept her silent. Fear and selfishness and the desperate need to hold on to this happiness for just a little longer. "Maybe we are fools," she said softly. "But at least we're fools together." Theron's arm tightened around her. "Together," he echoed. "And despite everything, despite the secrets, despite the fear, despite the certainty that this couldn't last," Avon let herself sink into his embrace. "Just a little longer," she promised herself. "I'll tell him soon." But soon was a dangerous word. And time, as she would soon discover, was not on their side. 3 months into their marriage, Avon realized she'd never been happier. It was a strange thing to admit, even to herself. She'd spent so long bracing for disaster, waiting for the other shoe to drop. That happiness felt like wearing someone else's clothes. Beautiful, but not quite hers. Yet here she was, waking up beside Theron every morning, taking meals with him, walking with him, laughing with him, learning the 1,000 small details that made him who he was, that he preferred his tea bitter, that he read poetry when he couldn't sleep, that he talked to his horse like it was an old friend. And the way he looked at her, gods, the way he looked at her, like she was something miraculous, something worth protecting, something he'd been waiting his entire life to find. "You're staring at me again," she said one evening, glancing up from her book to find his gaze fixed on her face. "I like looking at you." "Why?" "Because you're beautiful." Avon laughed, shaking her head. "I'm ordinary. Plain brown hair, plain brown eyes, nothing remarkable." "You're wrong." Theron set down his own book and moved closer on the settee they shared. "Your hair catches the firelight like autumn leaves. Your eyes are warm enough to thaw even me. And your face." His fingers brushed her cheek, gentle as always. "Your face is the first thing I want to see every morning and the last thing I want to see every night." Her breath stuttered. "Theron." "I know." His hand dropped. "I know I said this was just an arrangement, that I couldn't offer you love." He laughed quietly, the sound pained. "I was a fool to think I could control that, to think I could be near you every day and not—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The darkness, Avon said carefully. What happens if you feel too much? You said strong emotions make it worse. They do. His jaw tightened. Love is the strongest emotion of all. If I let myself feel it fully, admit it out loud. He shook his head. I don't know what would happen. The healers always warned me to stay distant, to never let anyone close enough to matter. So you're afraid? Terrified. Avon set down her book and took his hands in hers. His shadows stirred beneath his skin. She could see them now, faint dark threads pulsing at his wrists. But they settled at her touch, as they always did. I'm afraid too, she admitted. I've been afraid since the day we met. Afraid you'd see what I really am and turn away. Afraid I'd lose the first good thing I've ever had. She squeezed his hands. But I'm more afraid of never telling you the truth. Theron went still. The truth? About what I feel. She met his eyes, adrenaline flooding her veins. I love you, Theron. I don't know when it happened or how. But I love you. And I'm tired of pretending I don't. The silence that followed was deafening. She watched emotions flicker across his face. Shock, wonder, fear, joy, all tangled together into something she couldn't read. Avon, he breathed. He stopped. His face went white. Theron? Avon gripped his hands tighter. What's wrong? He didn't answer. His eyes had gone wide, fixed on something she couldn't see. The shadows at his wrists were moving now, crawling up his arms, spreading across his skin like living ink. No, he gasped. Not now. Not... His body convulsed. Theron! Avon caught him as he slumped forward, his weight nearly dragging her off the settee. His skin was ice cold, colder than she'd ever felt it. The shadows were everywhere now, covering his arms, his neck, creeping toward his face. Get away, he managed through gritted teeth. Can't control. I'm not leaving you. You have to. His voice was barely a whisper. The darkness. It's never been this strong. His eyes met hers and she saw it, pure terror, not for himself, but for her. Run, he begged. Then his eyes rolled back and he went limp in her arms. Help! Someone help me! Avon's screams brought guards running. They burst into the room to find their queen cradling their unconscious king, shadows writhing across his body like serpents made of smoke. Don't touch him, Avon commanded as they moved forward. The darkness. It might spread. Get the healers. Now! One guard ran. The others hung back, their faces pale with fear. Avon pressed her hands against Theron's chest, willing the shadows to retreat the way they always did when she touched him. But this time, nothing happened. The darkness pulsed under her palms, cold and hostile, fighting against her presence instead of yielding to it. Come on, she whispered desperately. Come back to me, please. The healers arrived within minutes. A team of them, led by an elderly woman named Orla, who served as the king's personal physician. Her expression went grave the moment she saw him. How long has he been like this? She demanded. Just minutes. We were talking and he just collapsed. Orla's hands moved over Theron's body, her touch professional but gentle. The shadow sickness has progressed faster than I've ever seen. It's reached his heart. She looked at Avon, her eyes heavy with meaning. What were you talking about when this happened? Avon's voice failed her for a moment. I told him I loved him. A long silence. Ah, Orla said softly. Then he tried to feel it back. What does that mean? The healer straightened slowly, her old joints creaking. I've served the royal family for 40 years, Your Majesty. I was there when the king's father died of this same affliction, and his grandfather before that. The shadow sickness has plagued this bloodline for generations. A curse, Avon whispered. Yes, one so old that no one remembers its origin. What we do know is that it feeds on emotional connection. The more a king of this line allows himself to love, the stronger the darkness grows. Theron's father lasted until he was 50, but only because he kept his wife at arm's length, his children at a distance. He died alone and cold, consumed by shadow. Aven stared down at Theron's pale face, the darkness still crawling beneath his skin. So if he loves me, the curse will kill him. Orla's voice was heavy with grief. It's already killing him. The fact that he's survived this long, that he's let you this close, it's a testament to how much your presence calms the darkness. But calm isn't cure. And love, true love, the kind that demands to be felt fully. She shook her head. It's poison to him. There has to be a way to break it. If there is, no one has found it in 200 years. Aven's hands were shaking. She pressed them harder against Theron's chest, feeling his heartbeat weakly beneath her palms. I won't accept that, she said fiercely. I won't watch him die because he dared to feel something. Orla studied her for a long moment. There are rumors, she said slowly, old stories, that the curse was created by a shadow witch, a wolf born with darkness in their blood, and that only someone with the same gift could undo what was done. Aven's blood turned to ice. A shadow witch, she repeated. Yes. The darkness in the king's bloodline didn't come from nowhere. It was put there, woven into their very essence. Fight darkness with darkness, the old texts say. Orla paused, her eyes flickering to Aven's covered arms. But shadow witches are rare. Most don't survive childhood. And the few who do? Her gaze grew knowing. They learn to hide what they are. Because the world is not kind to those who carry shadow in their souls. Aven couldn't breathe. Before I became royal physician, I worked for many years as a traveling healer. Orla continued quietly. I served many villages in the northern territories, including one called Ashwick. The world tilted. I remember a family there, the healer said, a powerful alpha with 2 daughters. And I remember when the younger one began showing signs of the shadow gift. Dark marks that spread across her skin. Fires that started without explanation. She met Aven's eyes. I also remember a young man who died in one of those fires. And I remember who was truly responsible, though I've been forced to keep that secret for 15 years. You know, Aven whispered. You've always known. I was called to the estate that night to deliver medicine for your sister's fever. I arrived just as the fire started. Orla's voice hardened. I saw what happened through the garden window. I saw who started the flames. But your father threatened to destroy my family if I spoke. So I stayed silent. She placed a weathered hand on Aven's arm. I think perhaps it's time to stop being silent. Both of us. Aven looked down at her hands, still pressed against Theron's chest. Beneath her sleeves she felt it. The prickle of her own shadow, stirring in response to the darkness in him. I need to be alone with him, she heard herself say. Orla nodded slowly. I'll be right outside. Call if anything changes. The door closed. The room went quiet. And Aven, finally alone with her dying husband, rolled up her sleeves for the first time in years. The shadow marks were there, as they always were. Dark, vine-like patterns that started at her wrists and spread up her forearms, swirling across her skin like living tattoos. They'd appeared when she was 13. They'd grown every year since. And now, looking at them beside the darkness consuming Theron, she saw what she'd never seen before. They were the same shadows, the same patterns, the same darkness, just expressed differently. I'm like you, she whispered, touching his face. I've always been like you. I just never understood what that meant. The shadow beneath her skin pulsed in response, not threatening, not cold, reaching. Aven closed her eyes and, for the first time in her life, stopped fighting. She let the shadow rise, The darkness spread across Avon's skin like water finding its level, covering her arms, her shoulders, and her neck. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home. She placed both hands on Theron's chest and pushed. Not physically, something deeper. She pushed with her shadow, letting it flow into him, seeking out the darkness that was killing him. And when they met, the two shadows, the two pieces of the same ancient curse. They recognized each other. Theron gasped, his back arching off the settee. His eyes flew open, not silver now, but pure black, swallowed by shadow. "Avon," he choked out. "What are you—" "I'm fixing this." Her voice sounded strange, layered with something deeper. "I'm fixing us." She could feel it now. The shape of the curse. It was old, so old, wound through his bloodline like rot through wood. But it wasn't complete. It was only half. The dark half, the hungry half, the half that consumed without giving anything back. And Avon was the other half. The realization hit her like lightning. "The curse needs balance," she breathed. "Shadow and shadow, cold and heat. Take and give. Your ancestors were cursed with the darkness that consumes. Mine were cursed with the darkness that sustains. We were never meant to be apart." "What?" Theron struggled to focus on her, fighting against the shadows trying to pull him under. "Don't fight it." She pressed deeper, her darkness twining with his. "Let me in. Let me balance you. I'll hurt you. You won't." She was certain now, more certain than she'd ever been about anything. "You can't. We're made of the same shadow, Theron. The same curse split in two. That's why I calm your darkness. That's why your presence steadies mine. We're two halves of the same broken thing." His black eyes searched her face. "How do you know?" "Because I can feel it." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I've felt it since the moment we met. I just didn't understand what it was." The door burst open. "Get away from him." Avon turned to see her father, Corvin, storming into the room, his face twisted with rage. Behind him came Tanith, her expression a mixture of triumph and fear. "Guards!" Corvin bellowed. "The queen is attacking the king. She's using shadow magic. She's killing him." "Father, no," Avon started. "I told you," Tanith said, her voice shaking despite her attempt at smugness. "I told everyone what she was, and no one believed me. Look at her. Look at the marks on her skin. She's a monster, just like grandmother was." But before Avon could respond, another voice cut through the chaos. "That's quite enough, Lord Corvin." Orla stepped into the room, her weathered face set with determination. Behind her stood two royal guards, their hands on their swords. "The healer?" Corvin snarled. "What authority do you have here?" "The authority of truth." Orla moved to stand between Corvin and the settee where Avon still crouched over Theron. "I've kept your secret for 15 years because you threatened my family, because you had the power to destroy everyone I loved, but I'm done being afraid." Corvin's face went white. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about." Orla's voice rang through the room. "I was at your estate the night Eric Vance died, delivering medicine for Tanith's fever. I saw you arguing with him in the garden through the window. He'd discovered what you really were. Not just a wolf, but a shadow carrier, like your daughter. He was going to expose you, reveal that the great Alpha Corvin carried the same curse he'd publicly condemned in his own child." "Lies," Corvin spat. "I saw you burn him." Orla didn't waver. "I saw the shadow fire leap from your hands. I saw you stand over his body and smile, and then I saw you drag your unconscious daughter from her bed and place her beside the flames to frame her for your crime." The silence was absolute. Tanith stumbled backward, her face ashen. "Father, that's not— You said she—" "She's lying," Corvin roared. "She's a senile old woman who— I have proof." Orla reached into her robes and withdrew a small leather journal. "Your mother's diary, Lord Corvin. She hid it in the Ashwick Temple before your father had her killed, hoping someone would find it and learn the truth." I discovered it years ago while tending to the temple's sick. She held it up. It documents everything. The shadow gift that runs in your bloodline, the techniques she used to suppress it, her fear that her son would inherit the darkness, and her prayer that you would learn to control it rather than destroy others. Corvin's face had gone from white to purple. Your own mother was shadow-touched, Orla continued, just like her mother before her, just like you are, just like your daughter is. Your father discovered the truth and had his wife drowned to protect the family name. You grew up knowing what you were, hating what you were, and when your own daughter manifested the same gift, you couldn't bear it. You have the shadow too, Avon said slowly, staring at her father. All this time, you hated me for having the same gift you carry. Had. Corvin's voice cracked. I cut it out of myself years ago, ripped it from my very soul. Do you know what that costs? Do you know how much it hurts? His eyes blazed with old fury. And then, you were born, and the shadow claimed you before you could even walk. A constant reminder of what I'd given up, of the monster I almost was. So you made me believe I was the monster instead. You are a monster! Corvin lunged forward, but the guards caught him, holding him fast. You're everything I tried to escape, everything I sacrificed to destroy. The only monster here is you. Avon's voice was quiet but steady. You killed Eric. You killed grandmother. You drove mother to her grave with your lies and your hatred. And you tried to destroy me because I had the courage to be what you were too afraid to accept. She turned to Tanith, who was trembling, tears streaming down her face. You cut out your shadow too, Avon said gently. Didn't you? That's why you've always seemed so empty, so cold. You ripped out part of yourself to please him. I had to, Tanith whispered. He said it was the only way. He said if I didn't, I'd end up like you, alone, hated, worthless. She collapsed to her knees. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know about Eric. I didn't know he. I know. Avon's heart ached for her sister, even now. I know. She turned back to Theron, still lying on the settee, his eyes black, his body racked with shadow. But he was watching her now, conscious, aware. Avon, he whispered. I'm here. She knelt beside him, taking his hands in hers. I'm going to finish this, but I need you to trust me. I trust you. I need you to do something terrifying. What? She pressed her forehead to his, their breath mingling, their shadows swirling together like dark water. I need you to love me, she said, fully, completely, without holding back. Let the curse do its worst, and let me catch you when it does. It will kill me. It will try. She pulled back to meet his eyes. But it won't succeed, because the curse was never complete. It needed both halves to function properly, to take and to give, to consume and to sustain. We have both now. We are both. She squeezed his hands. Love me, Theron, and let me love you back. And let's find out what happens when shadow meets shadow and finally becomes whole. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, small and surprised and full of wonder. I love you, he said. The darkness surged, and Avon held on. Pain. That was the first thing Avon was aware of. Pain unlike anything she'd ever experienced, like being torn apart and remade at the molecular level. The shadows raged around them, through them, in them, a hurricane of darkness that threatened to consume everything. But she held on. She held onto Theron's hands, onto the love pulsing between them, onto the certainty that this was right, that they were right, that 200 years of broken curse could finally be made whole. The darkness peaked, a moment of absolute black, of total nothing, and then light. Not bright, blinding light, but something softer, warmer, like the first rays of dawn after the longest night. The shadows didn't disappear. They transformed, shifting from cold, consuming darkness into something else. something balanced, something alive. Avon opened her eyes. Theron was staring at her, his eyes silver again, wide with disbelief. The shadows on his skin had receded, but they hadn't vanished entirely. They remained as faint patterns, dark threads woven through his skin like tattoos. Beautiful instead of terrifying. She looked down at her own arms and saw the same thing. Her marks had changed too, no longer angry and sprawling, but graceful, controlled. Part of her instead of fighting against her. What happened? Theron breathed. We balanced it. Avon laughed, the sound half sob, half joy. The curse. It was never meant to kill. It was meant to bond. To connect two shadow-touched bloodlines into something stronger. But when they were separated, when one half was lost, she shook her head. It became a sickness instead of a gift. Theron sat up slowly, flexing his hands, staring at the marks on his skin. I feel warm. What? Warm. He laughed incredulously. I haven't felt warm since I was a child. The cold was always there, always creeping. But now, he pressed his hand to his chest. It's gone. The darkness is still there, but it's quiet, content. Because it's not alone anymore. Avon touched his face, marveling at the warmth she felt under his skin. Neither of us are alone anymore. His expression softened. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. I love you, he said into her hair. I love you, and it doesn't hurt. It doesn't burn. It just feels like truth. I love you too. She was crying now, tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. I've loved you for so long, and I was so afraid. No more fear. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining. No more hiding, no more shame. We are what we are, and what we are is extraordinary. 6 months later. The kingdom of Valdros had never seen anything quite like it. An alpha king who smiled, who laughed, who walked through his palace holding his queen's hand like a lovesick young wolf, instead of the cold, distant monarch they'd always known, and a queen, shadow-marked and proud of it, who had transformed from a village outcast into the most beloved woman in the realm. They're staring again, Avon murmured as they walked through the capital market, guards trailing at a respectful distance. Let them stare. Theron squeezed her hand. They're not staring because they're afraid. They're staring because they've never seen their king happy before. It was true. The changes had rippled outward from the palace like stones thrown into still water. The claiming law had been abolished within the first month. Shadow-touched wolves were no longer hunted or hidden but welcomed, their gifts finally understood as something to be cultivated rather than feared. Corvin sat in a prison cell, convicted of murder and treason. His title and lands had been stripped, his crimes publicly acknowledged. Tanith had chosen exile at first, unable to face the kingdom that now knew the truth. But slowly, tentatively, she'd begun reaching out to Avon, seeking to rebuild what their father had destroyed. And Orla had been appointed royal physician, rewarded for her courage, with a position she'd more than earned. But for Avon, the greatest change was simpler. She was happy. She was loved. And she no longer had to hide. That evening, she stood on the balcony of the royal chambers she now shared fully with Theron. No more pretense, no more distance, and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. Arms wrapped around her from behind. What are you thinking about? Theron asked, his chin resting on her shoulder. Everything. She leaned back into his warmth. How different my life is now. How afraid I used to be. How I almost missed all of this because I was too scared to let anyone see the real me. The real you is magnificent. She turned in his arms, facing him. The shadows played beneath both their skins now, swirling in harmony, connected in ways no one else could see. The real you is pretty magnificent too, she said. He smiled. That expression that had started everything, the one she'd never grow tired of seeing. "I have something for you," he said. "Another gift? Theron, you've given me half the treasury already. This is different." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Open it." She did. Inside, resting on dark silk, was a ring, silver, set with a stone she'd never seen before. Black shot through with veins of light, like a captured piece of their shared shadow. "It's made from cursed stone," Theron explained quietly. "The same stone that was used to create the original curse 200 years ago. I had it reforged, reshaped, repurposed." He took the ring from the box. "It's not a symbol of darkness anymore. It's a symbol of balance, of two broken things that became whole together." Avon's vision blurred with tears. "Will you wear it?" he asked. "As a reminder that no matter what shadows come, we face them together?" She held out her hand. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." He pressed his forehead to hers. Forever. Without fear. Without shame. Without limit. Below them, the kingdom stretched out toward the horizon, peaceful and prosperous and changed beyond recognition. Above them, the first stars emerged, silver points of light in the darkening sky. And between them, the shadows danced, no longer a curse, but a gift. A reminder that sometimes the things we fear most about ourselves are the very things that make us worthy of love. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment letting me know your thoughts. Your support means everything. Until next time.